my pleasure to introduce Jeff Fawcett. Jeff was trained in Nebraska. I was telling him earlier that some of you right here remember Les Sheffield did water tours for the university in 19, I think it must have been 1991 or 92. We were on one of Les's water tours around Cheyenne. And had Jeff speak for about an hour about all the issues Wyoming was facing. We were facing the issue with Wyoming, and we thought it was a pretty big issue. It was. Jeff went through the litany of all the issues he was facing. I didn't feel very bad. Indian tribes of 4 other states, and so he's got a great background. He started his career kind of working for the Denver Water Board, and he's been state engineer for Wyoming, a federal representative and chairman of the Red River Compact. He's also active in the Western States Water Council and the North Denver Water Association. He got a civil engineering degree from the University of Wyoming, and he's a original professional engineer in Colorado and Wyoming. Please welcome Jeff Fawcett.
Thank you all. I'm not the governor, so if you want to leave now, that would be okay. Amy didn't tell me about the rule about not videographing the Q&A. I thought that might be important today based on the introductions that I just heard. Anyway, I'm very pleased to be here. This is obviously my maiden visit to this organization. I've heard a lot about, obviously, and participated with NWRA, both nationally and the Nebraska version of NWA at their annual meeting. So I'm very pleased to be here with you today at this roundtable. I know the governor is the sort of the traditional opening meeting of the year. And I'm a bit of a poor substitute for that, but I did have the opportunity to visit with him and his staff. He certainly appreciated that invitation. Again, sent along his own thanks for the work of this organization in tackling really complicated and often controversial issues of water dealing in the state of Nebraska. He often talks highly that the #1 resource of this state is the people, the citizens of our state. But closely following people, he'll have water. And water, while not high on some levels of the agendas, is certainly the #1 issue of the natural resources that we all know and love and work on every day across this group. His schedule, of course, just simply didn't allow his attendance today. He is getting ready for his own State of the State. I think he's visiting with the President later today as well. So we're all going to learn a lot more, I think, tomorrow through his State of the State address about his own legislative agenda and priorities for this session and the coming year. I can tell you at sort of the working level, since I joined the cabinet, I was one of the last folks to show up. I did tell the governor he kind of wasn't very forthcoming during the interview phase that based on my first 5 months, he left a few things out that apparently I'm going to have to work on, and I was hoping maybe it had been solved. I'm not that naive, but it is fun to kind of kid him about that. And the response I got was, well, Jeff, we would have been a little bit more forthcoming, but we wanted you to come. So we didn't want to scare you off. So I'm glad he offered. I accepted. I couldn't be more pleased to be the director of the Natural Resources Department for the state of Nebraska. It is truly not only just a personal, intellectually challenging opportunity at this phase of a long career, but when you had a position like this, like I did once before for the state of Wyoming, and then left, went to the private sector, that was also enjoyable. But the private sector just simply doesn't allow you to meet and get to know the folks that are in this room in very different ways. And to get back into the policy, into the legal issues that I've been around as an engineer my entire career, really was a golden opportunity. And to, as much as I thought I knew about the state of Nebraska, being your upstream neighbor, I often introduce myself as I was the guy you sued a long time ago. But quite honestly, one of my biggest successes while I was at Wyoming was achieving the settlement that we got with the state of Nebraska. We brought to close, before litigation, a settlement on the North Platte River that I think the fact that you don't hear about the North Platte River between Wyoming and Nebraska any longer is a bit of a testament of the success of that particular settlement. It was crafted by the water managers. No offense to my legal friends, but we did have to excuse them from the room before we made real progress on coming up with the technical conclusions that had to occur to truly and dramatically change the relationship between the two states on the North Platte River. And I think we accomplished that. 16 years later, that settlement was in 2000. It simply is non-controversial at this point. And now with my change of hats as I go to the Panhandle and meet with constituents who are on the other side of the table that are now constituents of my agency, they echoed that same resolution from the Nebraska perspective, that we put to rest clear, concise, implementable activities in that settlement. Everybody knew what they had to do by the time the deal was closed. That hasn't occurred other places that involve the state of Nebraska. And those are some of the challenges that we have ahead. So I'm really pleased to be here. I think one of the strongest messages the governor's been sending just at sort of an administrative level is that you all heard him probably talk about his efforts to grow Nebraska. And that is a theme that, as a cabinet member, is brought up every single time we're either with him as a group or privately. And that takes a variety of forms, but one of the big ones that is really being charged, and it's being charged to all of the departments, including the Department of Natural Resources, is to look very hard at how we can make it easier to do business with the state of Nebraska. Our citizens need help. They don't need more red tape. They'd like less red tape. Governor Ricketts is very well spoken about. It's not that people don't want any government, they just want a better government. And so that is a real charge that certainly the Department of Natural Resources will be implementing, as well as all my fellow agencies, looking for places to reduce red tape, making things more efficient, doing more with less, making it a conscious effort for continuous process improvement across all of state government. And that is being drilled in to the managers across all of state government. The Department of Natural Resources is not an exception, certainly. Let me talk about some water. I became director 5 months ago. I'm up to about 5,000 or 6,000 miles on my car, or actually one of the state cars. My interest from the get-go has been that I have a long resume. I've been in the water game a long time. I obviously haven't been in the water game for Nebraska. And while I understand the issues, I'm learning the niceties of this state's laws compared to other states' laws, and there's clearly differences across the West and unique structures within Nebraska that are very unique and very important. But what I didn't know is all the players, many of whom are in this room, and as you introduced yourselves, I recognized and had met already with many of you as part of my initial sort of world tour, if you will. For some reason, I have worked in 2 states who, for some reason, put the capital in the corner of the state. Not very conducive to traveling the state. So, lots of miles, but it was a real important thing for me, as a new director of this great department, to get out and to personally meet who's involved with water. One of our biggest and obvious partners, obviously, the natural resource districts. I've been to 22 of the 23 natural resource districts to meet with their managers, some of their board members, some of their staff. Some took tours, some gave me hats, some gave me a hat that they wanted me to wear to the next NRD meeting. Some kind of wanted to give me a target. Anyway, it was great. Along the way, I've met with as many surface water irrigation districts as we could find. I've met with many of the major public power districts in this state. I've met with municipalities. I've met with the Farm Bureau, many of the water-related agricultural organizations. And that hasn't stopped yet, but I've captured a lot. It was like a master's degree in Nebraska Water 101 in 5 months. But that's been valuable, and I did it by myself. I purposely didn't bring staff, and we've got some fabulous long-term staff that know a lot about water in this state. But I really wanted to open up the door. I wanted people to learn about me, to meet me, and for me to listen personally to the concerns, the issues, where they like us, where they hate us, whatever it is. And people in Nebraska, you know, there's that Nebraska nice thing. They were also Nebraska blunt. But that's why I went there. So I was glad I went. I was glad I heard what I heard, and I'm going to continue to go back. I even met with the people that are suing us. The Attorney General's office wasn't terribly excited about that strategy, but as the new department and director of the Natural Resources Department, I got to go meet with the people who are suing me as well. I have to know them. They have to know me. We have to, at some point, whether we litigate or not, even when the litigation's done, we need to have some kind of a relationship between those entities and the Department of Natural Resources. So I've been with them too. Interesting meetings to meet with people that are really angry at some past activities. And to hear that, to understand their perspectives as I wrestle with the policy issues that we're going to have to wrestle with, as I consult with the Attorney General's office in strategies that they're pursuing on our behalf. I needed to hear those things, and we're going to continue to do that. That's going to continue to be a message and a mission that I do on behalf of the department. To get out, to talk, to listen, and hear from people who are involved on the ground. Can't be the Ivory Tower in Lincoln. I wasn't one in Cheyenne. Although the newspapers in Wyoming often referred to me as the czar because of some of the litigation I was involved with. To tell you the truth, the laws of Wyoming compared to the laws of Nebraska, I was the czar in Wyoming. I'm not the czar in the state of Nebraska. We're an important player, but there are many important players in water resources management in this state. And that is done by having relationships and having methods of working through those issues together. Let me, I've also met with, including just this morning with Dale, I've now covered the last 5 living former directors of the Department of Natural Resources. So I knew them all, but I've taken time to go meet them all. Often they're much happier now. They were like, should have called me too. But I knew them from our relationships in the past. Again, some of those were often in very difficult environments, but again, got some great things about what I've just inherited and taken this job. So there are no shortage of issues. We only have an hour, so I'm going to touch on some. I think we clearly want to allow time for Q&A, and we may want to keep the video graphing going, so we'll see how that plays out. But what I did learn in all of my travels is there is tremendous diversity of water interests in this state. This state also has, quite honestly, a fabulous water resource base. It is no wonder we're the #1 irrigated agricultural state in the country. And the stability and the sustainability, the resiliency of that resource, I think, is really going to be the future. We cannot become overconfident about how much water we have. We have a lot. We need to be careful with it. We need to be managing it. And there is a lot of management going on, both by the department, by the natural resource districts, and others. So I also ran into I was looking hard as I traveled the state for something that didn't have a long history. Those are gone. Everything you touch in water, people have to go back and start in about the 30s, maybe even before that, to sort of bring me up to speed as to why we're fighting today. And that is not new. That is a creature of the nature of being involved with water resources. But it is that history that I don't know, and that's really the steep learning curve that I have. The history is important, but there's nothing as a new director I can do about the history. So a lot of the litigation we're fussing with now started over issues that were long before I got here. There are new lawsuits with my name on it too, so I'm not immune. I was giving the Attorney General's office a hard time the other day about how I've been here 5 months. I already have 3 lawsuits where my name has shown up in the caption. In 17 years in Wyoming, I only had 2 the entire time. There's an active water constituency in the state of Nebraska. So let's talk about a couple of those. Republican River. I heard from afar that litigation was over. How silly of me. It is over at the United States Supreme Court. Things were as resolved as we could possibly wanted it to come out. And at this point, I think the relationship between Nebraska and Kansas and Colorado is on an upward trajectory. I did inherit a better interstate relationship that was very difficult over the last 10 to 20 years. We got some good clarifications out of those decisions. We're able to agree on the complicated accounting. I can tell you that the Republican River Compact is as complex in the details as any around. In Wyoming, I dealt with 7 interstate compacts. None were like the Republican. They're all different, but none were as complicated as implementing and accounting for and tracking the obligations and the interests and the uses, beneficial uses in each of the states, as is the Republican. But most of that detail is now sort of behind us. We know the procedures. Information is freely exchanged among the major players, and there's much less controversy now. And in fact, there really, as what I inherited, was really much more of a more progressive, moving forward, what can we do for the long-term sort of attitude among the states. There were clearly some challenges left behind. Those challenges, though, are internal to Nebraska now. We have some terrible intramural disputes in the basin, primarily and unfortunately along surface water, groundwater lines of water use. And they, as I mentioned earlier, sort of relate in part to sort of the past activities, with the tension of not having the clarity from the courts, imposed on top of some terribly dry years. There were just some difficult choices had to be made, and some of those choices are now under litigation. There's ongoing disputes now with the recent revised integrated management plans that the department worked very closely with all 3 of the natural resource districts in the basin to get them up to speed with the litigation, have them incorporate aspects of the agreement between the states on how we're going to move going forward. But there are still some elements of those integrated management plans that some of the users, even the Federal Bureau of Reclamation are quite upset with. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us to solve the Wyoming perspective. I was, as those that know me, I do my best to use humor. If you've done water stuff for a long time, you better have a sense of humor. You'll go home and shit yourself. And I did. I was commenting after one of our meetings to the staff that have been through the wars of the Supreme Court case, and I couldn't help but mention. I said, "Gosh, who would have known that our best friend in the room right now is the state of Kansas?" And it is very difficult. They're difficult issues. I'm not slighting the importance of those issues in the least. We really do want to engage. We're trying desperately to engage and trying to find some solutions that can make the water supply more predictable, more certain to the users looking ahead. Those on the surface water side are quite honestly, unlike groundwater, they are much more subject to Mother Nature's calling. And so it is amazing to me that, quite honestly, even this year, we're able to put in place the procedures that we hope will allow us to not have to take any kind of regulatory action during 2016. That's a very different system than the one I came from. You would never be able to tell anybody ahead of time whether they're going to be regulated or not. But the forecasting, the water supply, the contracting, the way the procedures are in place in the Republican are quite unique. And they are going to continue to take a lot of our time and attention. The legislature has granted us the resources to embark on a basin plan that was directed a couple of years ago. That is a slow process, frustrating to some, but we now have 60 or 70 people showing up at meetings, working as best they can collaboratively to talk about the issues, to talk about potential solutions, to talk about how the future can be better now that we know sort of the rules of engagement. The state of Nebraska simply wasn't in compliance with the compact for a long time. We are now, and we're not going back. We're not going to have that fight again. We are going to comply. And so that is behind us. Now we need to wrestle through the difficult water management issues that we have to deal with to make sure our surface and groundwater users can continue to have the resiliency, the sustainability, quite honestly, the predictability that they want so desperately for their own future agricultural futures. We think there's opportunities out there. Some of the litigation gets in the way, but it is what it is, and so it's not a stopper in my view. In all things solution, just because we're in litigation. So clearly the litigation is a distraction. It takes time. It takes resources away from the solutions, but nevertheless, the solutions are going to be needed in my view. The litigation isn't going to end the controversy. It isn't going to end the tension we have in managing a very tightly connected water supply across that particular basin. Let me switch to the Water Sustainability Fund. This was a great stroke, as I've met with a number of the legislators. This, of course, fund came out of LB 1098 back in 2014. I quite honestly thought it was great legislative leadership, quite honestly, to put the word sustainability on the title of the fund. I mean, I think that is a good message to be sending to folks. In spite of the abundance of water in this state in many areas, it is very localized. We've got too much in some areas and not enough in others. Some people have suggested we just need to tip the state back towards the west a little bit to have a better sharing arrangement and get some of the rainfall that falls east of Lincoln back to the west. Nevertheless, that fund was established. It's got nearly $30 million in it for a couple of years of appropriations. The long-term plan, subject to appropriations, of course, is that that fund will receive about $10 or $11 million a year over a long period of time. And that sustainability of funding is as important as water sustainability is. Water projects are complex. They take a long time. There's an enormous engineering, permitting, feasibility, bringing the local folks together, efforts that go into any kind of major water project. And so the projects take a long time. The longer-term commitment for funding, I think, was really a good stroke. I hope the legislature does not back away from that in spite of the budget revenue problems that are now arising. So the new fund was established. It took about a year and a half. The Natural Resource Commission, not the department, is the ultimate adjudicator, if you will, of the fund. Both the department and the Natural Resource Commission went through a rulemaking process that concluded in September of last year. With that activity, we then proceeded to set up the process of receiving the first round of applications. And that first window of opportunity for applications was open from December 16th to the end of the month. So we now, in that 15 days, right at the end of 2015, sort of have our initial list of applicants. And in accordance with the statute setting up this program, the department now will review all of those applications. We do sort of a feasibility review. We make sure that things are complete, that they're clear, that there's enough information in that subject to funding being awarded to them, they are poised to move forward on the projects that they have. We got about 27, I think, 28 requests. I actually thought there might be more. That's not a concern of ours, so we're happy to have a shorter list. They, though, in total are about $50 million of requests for the $30 million we have. Part of the bill for the Water Sustainability Fund carved out a portion of the funding for Omaha's combined sewer overflow project. So there's a 10% sort of allocation that Omaha has to apply for, but will receive for that major long-term project. The Natural Resource Commission, I think, also through their rulemaking and policy are looking to set aside a portion of those dollars for smaller projects so that a few of the big projects don't gobble up all of the money. So there's sort of a large project, which is where most of it goes, but there's also smaller studies, important research efforts that in many cases the natural resource districts want to pursue, doing some good science and activities with groundwater resources. And those are sort of categorized for small, and small is a project that's under $250,000. So $50 million, we will do a review. We will then pass those projects on, those applications that meet the criteria of the legislature, the guidance that they gave us. That will go to the Natural Resources Commission. The Commission has decided to have initially a 10-member group of the 27-member commission do the initial round of reviews of all those, and make some recommendations. But at the end, it is all 27 members of the Natural Resource Commission that will do a ranking and a scoring of each of those applications, those projects, and that ranking will sort of determine then the funding allocations. The plan, of course, is that this is not a one-time deal. From now on, this window of applications will occur every July 1st. So there'll be, again, a 2-week, 15-day period every July 1st, assuming we have appropriations, to receive new applications that will then go through the same process. It is only this first year, because of the time that it took to get the program up and running and the rules in place, that it became a December period. But again, the interest was there. A long list of projects, some high-dollar ones, some low-dollar ones, but quite a range of stuff that the Commission will have to wrestle through, apply their judgments and rankings based on the criteria in the statute and in the rules that we have, and let that process play out. At the moment, due to the numbers and the types of applications we got, I think the department is trying to target sometime in March to have all of our work done so that they can be passed on to the Natural Resources Commission so they can start their work and review and deliberations after that time. So anyway, keep an eye on that. The message, though, is in the first year, $50 million worth of projects. They all actually look pretty good, but you don't have that much money, so something's going to have to be held back and perhaps carried over for another year. Mark is here. I think Mark, the Environmental Trust, had, what, $58 million in requests for the $19 million that the Environmental Trust had this year. Many of those projects are water-related projects as well. So the message is the demand, the interest. People understand the importance of water as much as everybody in this room. There's also the need for infrastructure investment in a variety of manners that fit the criteria for this fund and some of the other funds that are out there. This is a cost-shared fund, so the applicants need to be displaying and coming forth with non-state dollars as part of the match, so we can make the state dollars go further and to get them deployed. So that's kind of where we are there. Again, $30 million will be some carve-outs for Omaha's project, for the small projects, but still $20-some million that'll be allocated later this spring at some point, and then hopefully the appropriations will continue and these kind of investments can go forward. That Mike Jess was handling for us at the annual meeting. we do a lot of water planning. I think is perhaps some folks are either in the middle of it or they're completely unfamiliar with it, but there really is a lot of layering of water planning that goes on now. The first one, and probably the most important one for us, is really the integrated water planning activities that are carried out by the Natural Resource Districts and the Department of Natural Resource. After a variety of legal changes, of course, the final sort of integration of our surface and groundwater supplies occurred through LB 962 back in 2004. And that set up these processes for areas that were determined to be fully or over appropriated. Later on, the legislature authorized voluntary planning activities based by NRD, each one of their own decisions, and again in cooperation with the department. At this point, about 80% of the state, 80% of the NRDs are actively involved, either have integrated management plans or are working on them, or upgrading them, or making amendments to those plans. And so our staff is very busy working with the staffs of the natural resource agencies all across the state. The variety of consultants have been engaged. And all of those planning activities, while ultimately it comes back to the natural resource districts and the department, they all have outreach and stakeholder involvement types of meetings. So there's lots of opportunities for other water users to fully participate in those planning processes. I hear, as I traveled around the state, some frustrations about some of those processes, but it does require active participation. If you want your voice to be heard, you've got to play in the game. But these integrated management plans are sort of not static. I think the ones that were just reviewed and accomplished in the Republican was at least the third round of reviews. And so as new information, as we gather new science, new data, a lot of new information is being collected by the department. Lots of new information is often being collected by the natural resource districts and other entities, the universities' activities and the research in these areas. All of that comes to bear in these processes. And so as new information, as new, perhaps court cases provide guidance, these plans are subject to review and update all the time. I've heard a couple times where people are just so nervous that once the plan puts in place, then that's sort of it for all time. And that is really not the intent of these plans. They are sort of living plans to give the basis for the coordinated management of the surface and groundwater supplies that are, for the most part, regulated by two separate entities. So the only way to accomplish truly cohesive integrated management is for the two decision-making bodies to do that together. And that's the process the legislature authorized and the one that we're using. We try to bring, the department tries to bring, and the NRDs themselves try to bring a tremendous amount of science to the table in those efforts. And a lot of time is spent on the science. It is complicated. There's lots of detailed groundwater modeling that goes on that don't ask Jeff Fassett to run it, but luckily for me, I can hire a lot of smart people who know how to do those things, as do the NRDs. And so where we have collisions over technical disagreements, we generally can put the forces to bear to bring the technical issues together so that we're at least not disagreeing over the facts. There may be plenty of other areas that take some time to kind of wrestle through, but understanding the relationships between surface water and groundwater are not new. They can be analyzed. We certainly have data gaps that we wish could be filled, but nevertheless, it is the science foundation that we think makes a better foundation for the regulatory decisions that either we or the natural resource districts have to make. In addition to all of the integrated management planning occurring with the districts, there are 4 basin-wide plans going on, planning efforts going on as well. Again, they've been authorized in the Upper Platte, the Republican, the Lower Platte, and the Niobrara. These are, again, broad-based, river basin-wide planning efforts across multiple NRDs, across multiple other players in those basins involved with water resources. Again, an awkward, sometimes cumbersome process, but We bring in facilitators to help encourage positive dialogue through those processes, to bring ideas forward, to bring controversial, often issues of disagreements forward so that they can be talked about, worked on, questions are raised, people can then go away and come back with some of the answers, and then you proceed on. They are a long process. I think that, you know, to a large extent, the jury's still out as to whether those will be successful or not in helping bring together the management issues that, again, stretch across the multiple jurisdictions in a single river basin. But they are cumbersome. There's no doubt about it. This isn't, everybody gets a voice. Everybody wants a voice. And if you want a voice, then you have to participate. And you're not going to go to one meeting, get an answer, and then never have to come back again. That's just not the way these are designed, nor is that reality in how things work. Many of these issues take some time. They take some analysis. They take a lot of thought. They may even take some law changes to implement if that's what's coming up. But often what we've seen is you will get some new creative ideas. And then hopefully those can mature into some actual concrete solutions that can then, again, avail themselves of some of the funding programs that are available so that you can move forward and make the investments. Often some sort of investment is required to successfully implement any good water management plan. And there's local dollars, state dollars, other dollars that are being applied to those. But what you're seeing is this a change in the trend because of environmental issues, because of the water supply challenges we have. There's many areas where we need to stop thinking about growth, about new uses. We need to be thinking about management. We need to be thinking about resiliency. We need to be thinking about sustainability, how to manage what we have, which in some cases is at risk as a result of climatic variability and other activities, and the multiple new needs and pressures on the water resources of the state. There's still some areas where growth is clearly possible, but there are other basins where they're not, and we're actually faced with the difficult chore of trying to back up the train, if you will, where we've already overextended our use, and in order to comply with either interstate agreements or other controls, sort of backing up, remanaging, retiming the flows and things of that nature are just really critical. But these basin planning processes, the integrated management planning process, really does come up with some pretty interesting ideas that then we're testing out on the ground. And many of those do actually get tested through pilot programs before you launch into a full-scale project of some nature. I think everybody wants to make sure before we're spending some hard-to-come-by state dollars, or even the local dollars in many respects, that we've come up with a scheme that works, that's legal, that's accomplishing the wet water gains and activities that everybody wants. And those are the positive things that then we've already seen flow out, and to see those entities then come to the Water Sustainability Fund, perhaps the Environmental Trust, other funding sources that might be available. I can either wait for a question, or I can raise the issue of the Niobrara River that's been brewing here lately. And I'll go first. This door is available, isn't it?
No, that's a closet.
Can we adjust the podium location? See, I told you it was my first time here. I'll be speaking from that corner if you invite me back. The Niobrara is a really interesting issue. I will give my story. There are many more in the room who were directly involved. I was not, which is part of the concern. But just in September, 5 natural resource districts teaming with Game and Parks Commission and NPPD came out with a memorandum of understanding and a river management agreement that became public back in September. My first news of that is when Game and Parks Commission took it upon themselves shortly before then to brief Governor Ricketts about the proposal so that they knew what was going on, and I was invited to that process, again, having been here only a couple of months at that time. And there is a great sort of laudable goal. As you learn more about, as I learn more about the history of some of the controversies, certainly involving the department and involving this group of parties, many people were like, really? Those people are all agreeing with each other to do something? There had been some traditional wars that I've learned about, that clearly this agreement marks some real progress in trying to step back and look at some broader issues. So there is just some great sort of laudable goals that are desired by the group of this memorandum parties, if you will. In a broad sense, I think everybody understands the proposal is to, for the natural resource districts and Game and Park to acquire the major water rights associated with Spencer Dam, Spencer Hydropower Dam, that's owned by NPPD, take over the facilities and the water right interest for that facility. And it is obviously, certainly in the last 8 or 9 years, it is a major controlling surface water right of enough seniority that affects water users up and down the basin from a regulatory standpoint. Part of the activities to implement the proposal that they've presented is requiring some new legislation. There is a draft bill. There is not a bill, but there is some draft language that's was released about a month or so ago, and that has clearly caused some concerns. Lots of interesting and fair questions, I think, have sort of been raised about some of the legal aspects of the, not the goal, but the legislative approach in how you go forward to implement the goal that has been talked about by this group. The department is still sort of going through these questions themselves. We're consulting with our own in-house lawyers. I've had to spend a lot of time just sort of catching up. Again, nothing has a short history, and certainly some of the past activities, the past positioning, the past litigation, our state Supreme Court's decisions in a couple of different cases have all influenced sort of where we are today, and to catch up on all of that, to understand from the field organization of the Department of Natural Resources how we go about regulating water rights, how they involve many existing subordination agreements that NPPD had entered into over the years with upstream users, and how does that all look going forward under the new scheme that is being proposed. The draft language is sort of creating a new water right, a new name for a new beneficial use. It will not be a hydropower any longer, and it's a bit of a camel of protecting the river itself and allowing for, I think, what the group is terming basin management. And there's just sort of some devil in the details as the person who needs to implement the law that's being amended that us and other water users in the basin really have been trying to raise. And so I think, I know the legislature, Senator Shills, Senator Davis from that area have entertained, there's a meeting later today. I know that many of those parties are going to be at, including myself, to sort of really sort of delve into the concerns and issues that have been raised and see if we can make sure everybody's understanding exactly what this is going to look like. Because when you start creating something new that we've never seen before, heard about before, there is no penalty for being first on water, on anything. This is not unique to this issue one bit. Try being the first guy through the loop on most any water issue. And there's usually a big penalty. And the penalty is because of the uncertainty. People have their own view of where we are today, how it works today, what's going on today, what my grandfather told me, what my great-grandfather told me, and this looks different. If it looks different, people are nervous. Fair enough. That's okay. That's not a criticism. So there's lots of good questions out there. I'm hoping to hear the proponents for this proposal and for this particular legislative approach to address some of those questions. I've had some myself, some have been addressed, others are still sort of open. And we're sort of looking forward to that dialogue. The session has started now. I know there's a really strong interest in advancing something this session, if that's possible. And so a lot of attention is going to be put on this to see if this bill, some modification to this bill, or some other alternative can, again, go back and meet the goals that this group of sort of former warring parties have put together. And again, I haven't heard a breath about, wow, that seems like the right thing to do for the long-term future of the basin. And again, my agency's up there now. We're doing integrated planning with the NRDs. There's some basin planning activities. And then in comes a very unique proposal. It is of concern because of the size and the extent of this water right and the influence it has over the river basin. It would be no different if any other river basin came in with something similar where one of the most senior water rights is going to turn into something different and we don't know what it is and we're not sure what it looks like, and so they're nervous about that. And I've certainly heard from folks that have concerns. Luckily, they've expressed some of those concerns to the legislature, so we now have something to work on. Now we have something to work through, talk through, make sure it's understandable. That's certainly my interest. We're the recipient. These are changes to the water laws of the state of Nebraska that we will be administering and we will be implementing. So we do need to understand the ramifications. I think the legislature really wants to understand not only what this is doing, but whether there is any ramifications to others. And so that's out there. Then sort of taking more time than I thought. Last thing I wanted to mention, then I'll shut her down. We've had some interesting proposals. One of the, tipping back to the Republican for a minute, one of the things that came up during the basin-wide discussions of the broader group was occurring at the same time. We had about 13,000 CFS flowing through, around, and over North Platte and Grady and Maxwell, Nebraska. And so, to an obvious extent, people crossing the river on their way to the meeting said, gee, is there any way to take a look at moving some water from the Platte to the Republican during times like 2015, where we seemed, in most people's views, to have a very large surplus supply. Now, there are clearly interests on the Platte River who don't believe there's much surplus, or if there is, it's a pretty limited opportunity for when that surplus might be available. Nevertheless, there are some proposals brewing, at least we've heard about them. Nothing has been applied for. I've seen nothing very concrete, but there are some new ideas about even small quantities of water perhaps being moved from the Platte to the Republican that can help help us with the compact issues, and also, again, work to improve the situation amongst the surface and groundwater users in the other basin. There is tremendous interest on the Platte that need those molecules as well. So there's no silver bullet, no easy path here, but that will be an interesting sort of new issue to be tackled that's going to be discussed. I know a number of the parties are sort of looking at that. We're going to need some evaluations, hydrologic evaluations about, quite honestly, how often do we have the kind of big years we've had? Is it worth making an investment for something that maybe doesn't flow water that often? But can it make a difference in those years? You know, there isn't. Republican's a good example where no drop will go unwasted. It is so tightly controlled, so tightly regulated at this point. Any water that you can get to that basin can be beneficially used by the state of Nebraska. So, again, sort of another interesting issue that I'm sure you'll hear or read about. But taking more time than I thought, but I'm tired of listening to myself, so I'll stop, Amy, and take some questions.